Ends the Cypher. Prepare for another all-nighter.
On the Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON.
Welcome back to the Sports Cypher. I'm Maya Kyle with Farouk Basir, and we've gotten to that first hour, and it was football, and even some bullying about football. Mm-hmm. And then we're into the second hour, and we're going to talk even more football. But as you all might know, or maybe you don't, Grambling State actually forfeited their game against Jackson State, which would have been last Saturday, which was the homecoming for Jackson State. And this boycott was based around the fact that the players were showing solidarity for their fired head coach, Doug Williams, as well as to show that they were not happy about the state of the facilities that they practice in. They were saying that everything from mold in the weight rooms, that just their general facilities they had to practice in were unhealthy and not safe.
Plus the traveling, arrangements, the athletic director and the school president were flying on planes while they were taking 14, 15-hour bus rides to games.
Right.
And they weren't happy about that at all.
And they felt it was time to take a stand. And what better way to do it at a time when a homecoming matchup game with Jackson State would be a big deal. I mean, obviously there's a lot of historic history between those two schools meeting up and having homecoming games and rivalry. And needless to say, Jackson State didn't quite like it too much. And so though the players took a big stance on this, there are some greater repercussions coming down the pipeline because Jackson State isn't going to take this sitting down. They said they lost millions of dollars within the city. They say tens of thousands of people attend their homecoming. It had an impact even on the city itself, the money that's generated from this, and that not only do they feel that Grambling failed to handle this properly, but they're also part of, the Southwestern Atlantic, the SWAC Atlantic Conference, and that the conference themselves did not handle this potential situation well either. So Jackson State is looking for a bit of, some answers and some monies to come back to them, what they say they lost, which could easily be into the millions. So to talk about this situation, which is unfolding as we speak, we have Adam Jacoby, who's a writer for SB Nation, who did an article himself on this, who kind of fill in some of the blanks and tell us more about how this story is developing. How are you, Adam? How you doing?
I am doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So kind of give us a bit more. We kind of laid out the story, but you I know you've done some research on this. Kind of give us a backdrop of how this really all started.
Well, the situation at Grambling State has really been, and really not even only at Grambling State, but in the SWAC and at HBCUs in general, the situation has been sort of dire for student athletes, especially over the last few years, as budget cuts coming from the federal and state level have affected funding at these institutions. And as a result, everyone's feeling some very substantial cuts. It's not just football, it's not just athletics, it's every aspect of the university. And as a result, the situation in the Grambling locker room facilities and really everywhere in the football program have reached levels that are pretty understandably unacceptable for those athletes and would be unacceptable for pretty much any football program. You mentioned it, but the roof is, or the ceiling is coming down in some of the rooms. They've got mildew and mold visible. The floor is coming up at the weight room, and when you're lugging around heavy amounts of weight, the last thing you want to do is stumble on the floor. And according to the players, the mold and mildew have contributed to multiple staph infections, which are awful and can result in the end of your career. I mean, the center for the New Orleans Saints a few years ago, LaCharles Bentley, a great player, but who had to retire because of a staph infection in his knee. So this is serious business. And understandably, the players, when confronted with this situation and the 14 to 17-hour bus rides that they had to take, and I don't know if you've ever been in a bus for that long, but it's awful. Once that all compounds and once even their beloved head coach gets fired, eventually they had to say enough is enough.
Okay, but also with that, though, they're reading the story in the New York Times as well about the letter, I should say. The school was rejecting money that was being donated. What was the reason for that? Were they scared of some type of violation from the NCAA? What was the reason for them turning away money that could have helped the school improve some of these things, like the long grass, simple stuff like that, simple stuff like getting mildew out of the locker room?
Apparently they were rejecting it because the money was being earmarked in more specific ways than Grambling was allowed to allocate it, especially as a state institution. And so being that they're taking federal money and getting federal assistance, and, as every state institution does, they have to abide by certain rules. And so you can't just take this X amount of money if it has to go for, say, a new ceiling in the weight room. And so they're sort of hamstrung by regulations, and it's understandable that those exist just in the interest of equality and all of that. But at the same time, it has to be frustrating for the players, and they have to be able to figure out a way to actually make these attempts at donations and other assistance from third parties to actually work in the athletic department's favor, rather than saying, if this money isn't going for a new ceiling, then we can't have it. That they have to figure out a workable solution, because if you turn away even a dime, you're doing your athletic department a grave disservice.
And there was even said there was a letter, probably the same letter that was dated for October 1st, that was addressed to Sandra Woodley, who's the president of the University of Louisiana Systems, which goes over the 9 state universities. And in this letter, I guess, it came from Grambling's Legends and Friends of Football. And in that letter, they cited the exact things and even sent pictures of the conditions. And at that point, nothing was still done. And I guess they were saying that there has been budget cuts throughout the state of Louisiana, not just in athletics, but in academics as well. So this is something that had been an issue throughout the state, even leading up to this, not just with Grambling, but with other state universities as well.
Right, and it's especially frustrating when you consider that Bobby Jindal, in accordance with Republican philosophies, was actually turning away federal money in order to make some sort of political point. But that was money that could have directly helped all of the institutions in the state of Louisiana, which is one of the hardest hit by the recession. And so that compounds matters when even the highest levels of leadership in your state aren't doing enough to make sure that these schools and their athletic departments are taken care of.
That makes sense. An extreme right-wing governor rejecting money from a left-wing president. So, okay, that makes sense.
So